Well, good day, Move More, Learn More community. We are really fortunate to be interacting with Dr. Stephens-Sarloz in Hungary this morning. She is a researcher, a scientist, and a program developer in embodied cognition. And we welcome you here today, Dr. Stephens-Sarloz. We're so happy to talk with you.
Thank you for coming here.
I want first, many of our audience will not know that, we don't know a lot about the European work. We're really just beginning to embrace it about the last 10 years. So tell us a little bit about your work, your career, and your program.
So I was a teacher. I am a teacher as well now, but I was a teacher in a primary school, in high school, and I am a teacher at a university currently, but my main profession is a researcher, not teacher. I am teaching, but not in a high number of lessons. But I have some PhD students now. And so I started my life like a physical education, adapted physical education teacher and biology teacher. And my experience was that children who has a good skill in movement, they can achieve their cognitive lessons much better than somebody doesn't or couldn't move so properly so well. So I was a teacher in high school and elementary school approximately 30 years, and after that I left it. It has lots of reasons, but it is not apply on this podcast. So first I completed so many courses which were more sophisticated to prove children movement, to help them to achieve much better in the school. And it is not just about their knowledge, it is about their behavior and so many problems, for example, bedwetting and fecal retention or ADHD or sometimes autism spectrum disorder. So they have lots of problems, and I try to help them with moving exercises. And in my life, there was a period when I led a private school, and it was compulsory, but all of the children enjoyed this really much, the morning movement, special exercises, because at that time I completed some courses in Hungary and in abroad as well, which was about these primitive reflexes, which became my topic. So my interest is in this area around the primitive reflexes. And we had really, really good results. So their behavior were much better after doing these exercises regularly. I would like to emphasize regularly. So we did it from day to day, but in a group, so not individually, in a group. And they felt themselves much better. So they enjoyed their life. They didn't complain for everything. They were much patient. So it was really, really good. But after that, some rules in Hungary changed. And at that time, I started to make some research project in this area. And I decided I will write my PhD thesis from the primitive reflexes and sensorimotor development. And more than almost 800 children were involved between 5 and 7 years and in this project. And there was a control group, and some of them did some certain exercises, some of them didn't do. And we compared sensorimotor development and their attention and their visual skills and auditive skills. And we found if somebody could do the exercises, certain exercises from day to day, they could develop a lot, and in so many areas. And after that, I defended my PhD, and I became a teacher at the university. And my real researcher career started at the time because the university provided some device, not just across my experience. We had some results. We know we can measure activity of the brain, this NIRS device, and later maybe I will explain what is it. So we can see at that time when they are doing certain exercises, what is happening in their cortex, in the brain, and which area is affected with certain exercises. For example, this morning we tested senior citizens because these primitive reflexes could come back in our life. I will explain why, and we could help people to, I wouldn't say, because we are at the beginning of this research project, but we try to save them to get dementia or Alzheimer's disease with these certain exercises. And we just finished this data collection now. So later, maybe I can tell more about this project. So my first population were children, so not senior citizens, just because I read lots of research papers. This pushed me a little bit towards not just to the children, to adults and to senior citizens as well. So my goal is to help children with motor exercises, sensory and motor exercises, because I think there isn't any skills, any tools which can prove better than the motor exercises. The children's brain, and not just the children's brain, everybody's brain. Because if we are thinking about children who just was born, they don't do anything else, just moving. And if we reach this point, I would like to tell you some sentences about the primitive reflexes.
Yes.
These reflexes are automatic responses of the brainstem, so not the cortex. They're centers in the brainstem. For example, if a stimulation comes from the environment, for example, a baby touches something, the palm will grasp, and this is the grasping reflex. And if a baby will turn his or her head right side, the right hand will stretch, and the left hand will bend. And this is automatic responses. And in a certain time after birth, in 1 year, some researchers said after 3 years, these reflexes will be inhibited by the cortex, because there will be a wave from the brainstem across the upper places of the brain, but they will reach the cortex. It is really important. The movement will improve from cell to cell, a line, a network to reach the cortex. And these movements will stimulate the cells of the cortex, which can produce GABA, gamma-aminobutyric acid, which is the main inhibitor in our nervous system. So this inhibitor from cell to cell will go back to the center of the brainstem, centers of the spine, and inhibit the interneuron, for example, in the spine. And this reflex won't be inhibited anymore in a normal case. But if a child has some problem, for example, lack of oxygen during the process of the birth, or any problem with the mother and with the child. For example, the cesarean section is not so good for children. Unfortunately, sometimes, of course, it needs, but not in any case, every case. And the child can't move so many times and properly, because this reflex pattern has a special movement, and they have to produce many times when they are really small. And these automatical movements will develop the brain. And we use these types of movements to make a line, make a way to reach the cortex, to emerge the cells to produce GABA, gamma-aminobutyric acid. And when this neurotransmitter will appear, it can inhibit the certain reflex. And there is a more official way when we do exercises against the primitive reflex. For example, if we are talking about the grasping, the grasp is the special movement of the grasping reflex, but let something and open the palm, it is against the primitive reflex, and this movement is more efficient. And all of the primitive reflexes, what we are speaking about. By the way, there are lots, 70 or 100, I don't know exactly, but we validated and standardized the test, and it has 18 primitive reflexes, and we know which kind of exercises can inhibit these primitive reflexes. Many times when I make a test with a child who has some problem, for example, sensory process disorder, I found that he's about, 6 years old, and he has 15 primitive reflexes, and it is not normal. If somebody moves enough and does the movements of the primitive reflexes properly, it wouldn't possible. So I think that is a main problem, that children don't move enough, and not just in their early childhood, later as well. So movement is really important for our brain, because this is the first way to improve our brain, and after that we can build lots of things on top of that, cognitive skills and creativity and so on, but the first step is really important, because without that there won't be anything which can hold the whole life.
And what fascinates me, I work with a lot of OTs, I work in intensive dyslexia treatment program, right? And I'm the brain person, and then we have 3 or 4 OTs, we've got speech language. And what fascinates me is that in psychology, nobody learns anything about this. I've been learning for about the past 10 years. Well, I have my master's in physical education as well. So there was a little bit of a beginning of understanding of this. But what's fascinating to me is that I get all of these 5 to 9-year-old boys who are either, one, being counseled out of school because they have impulsivity and they have lots of need to touch others, et cetera, or they're being counseled to be retained for a year, okay? So we look at what I call the developmental pillars, always sensory motors first, then language, cognition, social, relational. And then I plot that data, doctor. And what's fascinating is that I would say 80% of the time, these high need, adorable, appealing kids have some skills above the 80th percentile and a lot of motor skills beneath the 25th percentile. And so we label them ADHD, which, they may meet criteria, ADHD, ASD, all these different things. And nobody in psychology knows to make a referral to look at the primitive reflexes. So my question to you, okay, no, you comment on that. I can see that you want to comment.
No, just continue, please. And after that, I will.
Well, it's so important to me that, I'm working with OTs to actually develop right now. It's an assessment of sorts. So I'll talk with you about your assessment offline. My question is, what's the relationship between the retained primitive reflexes and these diagnostic categories, specifically in children under about 11? Dyslexia, ADHD, autism, what's the relationship?
Mm-hmm. So I would like to start a really important thing, which would be really useful if, for example, psychologists, pediatricians, and people who deal with these problems would know about a little bit more. That these primitive reflexes have, I think, 4 main important things which depends on them. The first is eating. And because, for example, the sucking reflex, the rooting reflex, and the snorting reflex will help baby to eat. And this eating, so sucking properly from the breast, will help them to speech, because those muscles will improve, which we are using for when we are speaking. And this is one part. But there are some reflexes, the grasping reflex, palmar and plantar as well, which has really strong connection to, for example, the grasping reflex. Between the grasping reflex and the sucking reflex, there is a neural connection. Its name is Babkin reaction, after Dr. Babkin, who wrote down first time. And for example, if a baby can't eat properly, can't suck properly from the mother's breast, and we stimulate their palm, their soil, after some time, not for a long time, after some day, they will be able to suck. And for example, if somebody has a problem with speech, this is one of the main problems, the sucking reflex, grasping reflex retained. So this is one part. The second part is all of the sensory process. If we are speaking about the vision, hearing, and vestibular sensation, and so on, there are some primitive reflexes. And maybe we will understand better if I am speaking about the third, which is the postural settings of the body, because there are at least 4 or 5 primitive reflexes which will be able to help us to control the body, control the muscles, all of our muscles, and not just the muscles of our extremities, legs and arms, muscles of our eyes, muscles of our ear. And if somebody doesn't have this skill, won't be able to hear properly. Their hearing organ is completely well, but they can't, the function it doesn't work. Because it is really important thing, when we were born, in the inner ear, the semicircular canals are not completely developed. Approximately 70% the development rate, and if the baby will be able to lift her or his head up from the small bed, and when they are on their belly, they can lift up back, and they can turn their head, and they can move in this direction because of the crawling, for example. The semicircular canals will get so many stimulations, and this inner ear will be matured. But if it is not happening, it would stay in some kind of immature situation or state.
Right.
And the problem is that our muscle tone depends on where is our head in the space. And this semicircular canal will give the information to our nervous system where is our head, and the nervous system in any milliseconds will set our muscle tone, all of our muscles, where it depends on where is our head. And if this process will interrupt it somewhere, the muscle tone won't be proper, won't be able to work properly. And if we are speaking about, for example, dyslexia, the eye movement is really, really important when we are reading. And if somebody's semicircular canal, in this way, the horizontal canal, won't feel that the eye is moving, for example, when we are reading, our eyes are moving from left to right, and from the right side of the page automatically would jump at the beginning of the row. And if somebody has nystagm, will be able to read. If somebody doesn't have, for example, if somebody turns 8 times anti-clockwise, and the eyes won't move horizontally rapidly and properly, when they are reading, the eyes won't jump at the beginning of the row, and they were lost in the text. So this is a big problem, and it could be developed really, really well, because so the first step, inhibit these primitive reflexes with movements, and give some sensory stimulation, vestibular stimulation. For example, if somebody would go in a playground and use the swings and the turning things and the slides and as well, and trampoline, so they will do these simple exercises and just enjoy the playground. This organ in the inner ear will develop. But what is happening? Parents give their children smartphone and iPad and they are sitting in front of the TV, and these skills won't be developed at all. By the way, we just submit our articles because this is a pilot study. We tested 64 children between 2 and 6, and we investigated how much time they spent with the digital devices, for example, TV, smartphone, laptop, iPad, and notebook, and so on. And we found really strong correlation between retained primitive reflexes and the time of the digital time, which is not a surprise.
No.
Because they don't move and they don't use their motor apparatus to do exercises.
So I have so many things to ask you. We're going to have to talk offline because we have about maybe 4 more minutes. One thing I want to say to you, which is interesting, is that I've got a few people, like, do you know Bastien Sanac at Maloudia in France? I'm going to introduce you to some of my friends. Do you know him?
No.
Sanac? No, he would be great. And then, do you know Robert Malillo and Ty Malillo in New York? So I was just at Robert Malillo's clinic with a family, like a relative. And I actually saw Dr. Ty do the activity that you're talking about, where they put the child in the chair and they go counterclockwise and they look for, is it a nystagmus? What are they looking for?
Nystagmus, yeah. So when, So when we turn somebody in anti-clockwise way, 8 times, I used to do 8 times, we have to watch their eyes.
Right.
So the nystagmus has a fast and a slow movement.
Yes.
And if I turn somebody in this way, during the turning, the eyes will go back fast from left side to the right side. Mm-hmm. And because our nervous system wants us to be in the middle, mm-hmm. because the sight is proper when we can see in front of us everything properly. Mm-hmm. And when we stop, this eye movement will change, the direction will change. So the fast movement will be from right side to the left side and the slow in another way. And this is eye movement, which are, how can I say, essential. Mm-hmm. If somebody wants to read fast, not fast, wants to read in general. Yeah. But I forgot to tell you something earlier. There are some reflexes which provide the child to survive the first half year or first 1 year. For example, the Moro reflex, the diving reflex, the fear paralysis reflex, and then there is another one which is not completely a primitive reflex. It is a plantar tonic reflex, but it helps to avoid that child who can walk from some dangers. And if these reflexes will stay alive, can influence our feelings really strongly. So we found that so many children who has anxiety, and for example, teenagers who depressed and they are really nervous about everything, these reflexes are alive. And we found these reflexes among the senior citizens as well, mainly who don't have dementia, which was really interesting. If somebody don't have dementia, these reflexes are much more alive because mm-hmm. they feel that the environment is dangerous for them. If somebody has dementia, they don't care because their world is completely different. They don't feel the real world and they don't feel the real dangers. So it is really interesting because among them, these reflexes are really rare. They have much more reflexes which are alive, but not these ones. So, for example, if a child has anxiety, we have to treat this Moro reflex. Yes. I built a course to teach pediatricians and psychologists, psychiatrists, nurses and kindergarten teachers. And if somebody is interested in this topic and wants to help children and adults, and there was a lady from the United Kingdom, and she's a psychiatrist, and she told me that she tested everybody who arrived to her with severe anxiety and depression, and everybody had the Moro reflex.
Yeah. Yeah.
So and this is really interesting because after the COVID, I found the children who get rid of Moro reflex, when they came back, they had again, because the stress could trigger these reflexes again. Because when we are in some dangerous situation, the cortex will work a little bit less, and because the brainstem has responsibility to survive, and these reflex centers are in that area, so somehow these reflexes could be alive again if somebody is in danger, and it doesn't matter if it is a real danger or just we thought it was a danger, or psychological danger, or an operation, doesn't matter, it could come back. But we can work against this, and that can get rid of this reflex if he or she will be able to do the exercises regularly.
So this is so fascinating, and you're echoing actually some of what my other colleagues have said, but you're talking about it in a different way. So, Deb Lund, we did an interview with her. She runs a micro school for ADHD. Ty Melillo wrote chapter 2 in our book, Move More, Learn More. My question is, where can people find your book, which I have purchased, and where can they get the training? Because I think a lot of the people in our community are going to say, I want to take the training right away. Where do they go?
So about the book, accidentally, we don't have any book at home, because when I had this course, some people came abroad and they needed an English version. They are Hungarian, just their wife or their husband are foreigners. So I sold them or gave them, and I can't show you, but on the Amazon, everybody can order this book. Mm-hmm. And we have video packages as well. And I made 2 types of video package. One is by primitive reflexes, and another types of packages are by the problems. For example, the most useful exercises for ADHD, ASD, sensory process disorder, dyslexia, dysgraphia, speech problems, anxiety, clumsiness, and there are some advice for parents how many exercises I suggest per day. By the way, not so many, because it is between 3 and 6 for a child. So it is 8 minutes or 12 minutes.
Right. Yeah.
So it is not a long term process. And so they are available, and the course is available right now just in Hungarian, but I made a shorter version, and I think I would translate, because so many people are interested in, because they would like to help somehow, children, adults, senior citizens. So we will make an English version, and I think it will be available for our website, drsarloz.com. Okay. And there are some blogs, because I wrote some blogs just because I have to write some official papers for high impact journals. I don't have so much time to write blogs, but sometimes from time to time I write, and it is available in English as well.
Beautiful. Well, thank you for joining our Move More, Learn More community today. I want to tell you that I volunteer to come to Hungary and translate everything for you. I would love to do that. I've written 6 books and edited a bunch of stuff.
You are really kind.
I'll be in Europe in October, but then I can come back maybe in the spring. I would be honored to help you, because I want everybody to have access to this.
Thank you. My husband is Irish.
Oh, good.
And when I wrote this book, I translated, but of course my English is not so perfect, but my husband checked it. And after, if somebody, for example, you could read the material, is it perfect and understandable? Mm-hmm. We would be really happy to, and we will appreciate this.
All right. Well, that'll be a plan. We'll do it. We're saying so long today from our Move More, Learn More community. We really want to thank Dr. Stephens-Sarloz for joining us. This is a fascinating topic. You can visit her sites, and we'll put some links in the podcast description. Have a beautiful day, everybody.